Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first live stream after a bit of a break. Big Kris Live is back to live streaming, and that is a big thanks to our friend and collaborator, Dean Blundell, deanblundell.com. We are live now on DeanTube, which sounds filthy, even though it's just a different tube. There's lots of tubes out there. DeanTube, one of many tubes. It's like RedTube, but just a slightly bit more classier. We're going to get off the dick jokes. We've had a lot of a cornucopia of dick jokes on the podcast as of late, but we're going to take things to serious town. I've invited Kent Stewart back on the podcast, retired Major Kent Stewart. He was here on episode 3 for my favorite veteran, the Remembrance Day Eve podcast. And now David Harms also joins the discussion. David and I have crossed paths many a times during my civilian stint with the Canadian Forces. I believe, David, you were writing, was it a thesis you were writing, a big essay or a...
It was the full doctoral dissertation.
Wow. That's a mouthful too. Doctorate dissertation.
You should read it.
Yeah. You know what? I haven't had a chance. Is it published? Like, can I go read it somewhere? Because I was going to ask about that.
It's they're published through the libraries, so you can you can look it up. And
which one? Which university?
I did it through the Ryerson and York Joint Program in Communication and Culture. So you can find it there, and it talks about international broadcasting and the role of international broadcasting in nation-building operations. Yeah,
and you did use the project that I was involved with at the time as part of that study, but also previous ones, right? Which was it Kosovo?
That's right. Yeah, we looked at the 3 models in it were Bosnia, Kosovo, and Afghanistan.
Okay. And for those who are just catching up, we discussed this a little bit when Kent was on episode 3 regarding my past with the Canadian Forces, where in Afghanistan we were running a radio station, broadcasting to the populace of Afghanistan for the teenagers of Afghanistan to listen to. And the idea of this radio station was so that if the teenagers, basically, this is layman's terms, but basically that if the teenagers of Afghanistan were listening to our radio station, they were not out joining the Taliban or getting into trouble, as it were, and able to spread the message of peace and so forth. So that was a big part of my life, really changed my worldviews. And David was, again, writing his doctorate at the time, and using that radio station as an example. And you were always a great resource for me too, David. So thanks for being on the podcast and joining us. And Kent Stewart, a long line, as you demonstrated, even made the year-end highlight reel, Kent, all those medals that you've got behind the bar there that you're showing off in the background, a long line of family history in the Canadian military, and great to have you back again. So we're live on DeanTube, but of course the podcast, as always, is available after the fact on Big Kris Radio, on YouTube, and also on all platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and deanblundell.com too. Could we give Dean any more plugs? All right, we're moving on. It's Inauguration Eve in the United States tomorrow. If everything goes according to plan, Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the new president of the United States. Obviously, there has been a lot of contention leading up to this. Is it reasonable to expect that this so-called insurrection that we had not so long ago that's made headlines, has made waves, is it not so reasonable to expect that those are just the farmers with pitchforks and torches? Those aren't the actual soldiers of this movement, and we're yet to see the soldiers of this movement. People keep using the term civil war. And you know what? I think the QAnon people and the MAGA people would love to use the term civil war. But really what I think we're headed for is an insurgency. And let me lay out the comparison here. And I'm using America to Afghanistan as the comparison. And that's how far America, I think, has dipped on people's expectation levels. But 14% of Americans are all in on Q, the Q conspiracy, QAnon conspiracy theory, while 38% of Americans aren't sure or agree with some of the conspiracy. That is an awfully large portion of the population, especially when it's 14% who die hard believe in the QAnon conspiracy. Flash over to Afghanistan. 14% of Afghans identify as sympathetic to the Taliban and their cause. 14% of Americans are all in on Q. 14% of Afghans identify as sympathetic to the Taliban. Main question here, gentlemen, what are we looking at? I say potato, you say potato, I say insurgency, you say blank. We'll start with Kent Stewart.
Well, it's quite an intro there, Kris. Insurgency, I think, is an interesting concept in itself. And I'm not sure that what we're witnessing right now is an insurgency. And I think my own personal view is that I think Donald Trump came into this with a very detailed ideology and a plan for how he was going to tackle his presidency if he won. And he started before the election actually got underway 4 years ago. And he started to put doubt into the media, as we all know. He started a very robust, patriotic march towards the presidency. And he started to look at the GOP or the Republican Party as something that he could manipulate or change. And I would say this is very much like what Hitler did in the 1930s, before he took power. And with his very carefully picked staff of, smart people of the time and of the day. And once he took power and took the chancery, I mean, it moved from there. He created a propaganda ministry, and he changed the whole messaging of the media, of the entertainment venues of the time. Everything that was produced that the public could access was manipulated by Goebbels, by Hitler, and by others of his key staff members. And the whole purpose was, I'm going to change this government or this regime. Go from a democracy of like a social democracy sort of thing to a fascist regime. And he had a lot of templates to work from before he took power. I mean, Spain was a good example. Italy was a good example. And he took a lot of great, I'm going to use that quotation marks there.
Yeah.
He took a lot of good examples of how to do things. And once he had the power, he did them. And he had followers. And he not only manipulated that patriotism and that desire for change coming out of World War I, that the people started to believe in him and started to take on his ideology as well. And, I take it to the 1940s, late or mid 40s, 43, 44, like with the 12th SS Panzer Division, the Hitler Youth Division under Kurt Meyer. These 17-year-olds were cult-like participants.
Oh yeah, look that up on YouTube. Like, it's crazy to see some of those Hitler Youth videos, to see the training, the regime, the looks on their faces. It's scary. They
were obsessed with Hitler. He was their hero. He was their their statue of virtue, for lack of a better term. But that division fought the Canadians after D-Day, and the Canadians, and in the war diaries, talking about this Hitler Youth Division in tanks, an armored division that was kicking their ass for the first couple of days. And then it wasn't until they could actually get the word out to the troops going, you can't treat them like kids. They are killers, and they will kill you without even and so what Kurt Meyer's mistake was, by not giving quarter and not taking prisoners, it changed the whole process for Canadian soldiers. They knew that these young men were absolutely not going to be convinced otherwise. And so it was, we're going through and we're not going to stop. Yeah. So it wasn't, they're 17-year-olds. They're going to shoot you in the back as soon as they can. So I go back to my first part is this really, it has the pieces of an insurgency. You've got the ideology, you've got the cult-like belief system with some people. And, as soon as you put any sort of logic or factual information in doubt, and you put all of those sources that provide that information in doubt, then people have no other option but to believe their guy.
Yeah,
and that's I'm sure James has some information to pass in there, but that's my first sort of go at your question.
Yeah, so you mentioned the mob, Kent, and the mob that Hitler had, and Trump's got a mob too. We've seen it on TV.
Brown shirts.
And
brown shirts are alive and well.
Yeah, and he commands it with his Twitter account. That's now the finger that points to the direction in which it goes, which I think is the most interesting part. And I know, David, you have quite an analysis on communications and especially social media. Your take on how he's enabled.
Sorry, David, I call you James. I was wrong.
It's okay. He's in the basement. His best friend is named James, and I know James is probably coming over later for drinks. Anyways, but your take with how he's manipulated social media. I call him the greatest influencer of all time, Donald Trump. I don't
close.
Right? Like how what's your take, David?
Yeah, I agree with that assessment wholeheartedly. He's, if nothing else, he's very good at dominating the news cycle at almost any time. And I just think the one challenge, though, when we start talking about what happened on January 6th as the origins or the part of an insurgency, is it, to me, it really starts to inflate the language, to inflate the rhetoric around it, because yes, there's followers, and yes, there is a mob here, but it was much more of a riotous mob going on, in the sense that there wasn't really a lot of organization to it. There wasn't, outside of disruption, there wasn't really an end game of any sort. And so what happens? It's a symbolic win for sure. It's a great TV moment. It is again dominated the news cycle, removing everything from the transfer of power over into this discussion about, is this an insurgency? Are we on the cusp of a civil war? I think no is the answer. They're just not organized. They're certainly not armed in a way, in any kind of organized way. And so, outside of that small leadership from the president himself, there's nothing to organize.
Yeah, David, you mentioned civil war. Sorry, Kris, I don't want to take over, but this is an interesting concept, and the idea, and even my relatives in the States, in Michigan, they, very much Trumpers, and they talk about civil war, and I try to challenge them on this. I said, who is taking sides? And it seems to me, you look at the map after the election, the Democrats are popular in the urban centers, and again, you have a lot of the colored people and the Hispanic. I'm just going to say the ones that look different than the white supremacists that he leads. And so you've got the rural, like when I lived in New York City, it's a Democrat city, and with all its flaws, you could still get someone to give you a quarter, $1 to get on the subway, sort of thing. So there's still that sense of socialism, and I say that in a good way, not a bad way. But helping out your fellow man. But the Civil War, it's almost like it's the urban versus the rural. And so, David, what do you think about that piece?
I think I would divide it up a little bit further than that. There's definitely, you can see politically, there's an urban-rural divide, but the Trumpists, the mob here is not. It's not just a reflection of the Republican Party. And I think that's why we're seeing the biggest split now, is between the people supporting Donald Trump and everyone else in the Republican Party. And so to me, this is, of course, when we look at what happened on the 6th of January, the net gain or loss there, to me, seemed to be much more of a loss. And so there was a line drawn in the sand. You had a lot more Republicans starting to disavow the actions of the president, the incitement that they discussed. You had a lot of sponsorship dropping off, and most importantly, all the major social media platforms dropping them on that day or the day after. And so, talking about his ability to use Twitter to incite the mob or to dominate the news cycle. You drop 88 million followers in a day on one platform alone. that's a huge loss. That's a huge problem.
And he still was able to manipulate that whole piece with the First Amendment, cry and saying you're taking away our freedom of speech. And it's like, wait a second here. Again, I don't think a lot of Trump Americans or pro-Trump Americans understand what freedom really means. They certainly don't read their Constitution or the amendments to that Constitution. I mean, let's take the Second Amendment. It's probably the worst worded sentence. That's what it is, a sentence, but it's probably the worst worded sentence in English history, in my opinion. But anyhow, but that's the interesting piece you brought up about the mob. And I think the other piece that it attracts is the poorly educated. And this comes back to the whole idea of youth being very susceptible to ideology and to very, very, I'm going to say uber patriotism at the time. And so as soon as you get those on board and they don't question what doesn't make sense or might not make sense, but the whole idea of analyzing something and using factual principal information, primary information, it's certainly evident there that they're so easily led to believe things which are absolutely absurd.
Yeah. Now let's roll back to something, David. You mentioned how the Republican Party is now seeing a split: those who support Donald Trump blindly, that blind faith or that blind following, but also we're seeing that the side that are disgusted with what happened and are calling for a time of unity and are being human beings, which is nice. The thought that that we're seeing that divide now. Is there anything that we can take out of that? In that, is it gonna work out? Because I see we see these people like that are siding with them, but they've already been discredited. 14% of the country that believes that they're all in on QAnon. Well, they already believe it's a sham anyways. At Fox News and all the former Republicans like George Bush, who are siding now with sanity, are all part of the conspiracy, right? So I still think that's a dangerous portion of the population to have. And while they're not entirely organized, that fracture in the Republican Party, I'm happy to report, and I hope you guys can corroborate this, that we haven't seen that come down in the military. The military, for the most part, has been steadfast, and the Pentagon and everybody is looking for this peaceful transition of power. I think that we would have a problem if, say, for example, there was 14% of the military or 14% of the military leadership that decided that they also wanted to split away with Donald Trump. And come with me on this journey for a second, gentlemen. Like, what if Donald Trump showed up after Inauguration Day tomorrow in a general's outfit, started calling himself the colonel? What if he showed up and he had a shadow cabinet of ministers and former military advisors? Like, what if?
Well, the nice thing is that I think the majority of the military in the U.S., they take their oath seriously. It is something that is it's the first and foremost thing that they are taught and that they do, just like our military. We have our oath of allegiance to Her Majesty. Theirs is to the Constitution. And it is not to a person. It is not to the president. It is not to this. It's to their Constitution. And having served with the U.S. Army in Afghanistan and other places, this is something that comes through pretty clear, is that their loyalties are to upholding the values of the Constitution, not to whoever is president of the day. And I think that's one of the safeguards in their system, which is probably a very good thing, because I think the military will be the first ones to say, whoa, we're not getting involved in this. You're talking about an insurrection, or a coup, if you wish. We're not getting involved. Well, some soldiers may actually believe it, but they will not actively become engaged as a military unit.
Yeah. Now, I mean, there were some former veterans or members of the military, and police and fire and everyone who showed up in that riot. But, you know, I think that there's certain actors in the media or certain, bloggers out there, even, I wouldn't even say mainstream media, but certain blogs and bloggers out there who love to portray that as a salacious headline when a member of the services, whether it be military or police force, were seen or spotted in that riot. I mean, that has become a problem as well if we want to transition to, you know, news media in 2021 now, and how it's played its role in all of this divide, and even the way it trickles into Canada. I do not think that if we were not exposed to these arguments and these debates and a lot of this cases, these conspiracies in America, that we wouldn't have as fractured of a political divide in Canada as we do, although it is to a much lesser degree than they have in the United States, but it's still there.
Our news sources aren't as biased as they are down in the States. I mean, it's, you know, you just watch CNN for a couple hours, you know, and at the top of the hour, you've got the monologue from, you know, the individual that just bleeds his opinion or her opinion on what's happening. Yeah. Same thing with the other sources. They do the same thing. It's all of, you know, got to keep that membership, and you got to keep that viewership to keep the ratings up and keep the money flowing in. So at the end of the day, this is the other piece that I always find. You know, you hear them talk, they say the word socialism a lot, they say the word communism a lot, but both parties love their money. I mean, Come on. I mean, the economy of the United States depends upon, you know, a capitalist, organization. So it's funny when they use these terms, and I just don't think they really understand what they mean.
Yeah. Dave, your take on new media and the way the news has unfolded in the last few years, the way it's transitioned?
Yeah, I agree with Kent where it's very, very divided and much more polarized in the United States, of course, than here. But what we're seeing, outside of the mainstream media itself is much more splintering into factions, right? And just a characteristic of modern media, of social media, the communities that are self-selecting, the siloed information. And so not only are we slicing the market in slightly different ways, and not just, you know, Democrat, Republican sort of followers, but now we're getting into more and more, narrow sort of focuses. And this, you know, part of that ability, the ecosystem, I guess, of a segment of the population to just kind of listen to their own comments, believe their own propaganda, and they do start to get outside of the realm of facts as the rest of us know them. What I did want to come back to, though, the role that we're seeing with the military right now is that if the actions that happened on the 6th of January raised a lot of these questions about the loyalty, whether there were military members or police members or whatever that were inside that crowd, I think what we're seeing now is the symbolic response to that. And so, mass deployments around the Capitol and Capitol buildings, I think in every state across the country. We're seeing, you know, such what I would say, again, a great aspect of state propaganda here to sort of reinforce the connection between the military and the government, and not of a party, but the military and the government. And as Kent said earlier, the loyalty that members of the U.S. military place in the Constitution. And so it's really, to me, it's really communicating the fact that the system is working, right? The government is in full control. It's going to remain in control. The inauguration is going to be, seamless. Nothing will happen there. And so it's just sort of a response to this kind of chaotic, symbolism that came out of the January 6th events.
Yeah. Now, you know, are you that confident and nothing's going to happen, Dave? Because, you know, I read these, let's call them alternative news blogs, and like say Vice. And, I read on Vice today that 25,000 National Guard troops are being heavily vetted by the government before this event, and to weed out any potential bad actors, or whatever term you want to use for them, for any events. And then also, I read about, other examples of FBI chatter. When was the last time we heard FBI chatter? 2001 after September the 11th? Like, I don't remember FBI chatter being a thing in the last 5-6 years, but FBI chatter is back and back
that was
hard.
The X-Files. That was the X-Files.
Oh, was it? So, I just feel like there seemingly is some of these, maybe they're scare tactics, maybe it's just overblown the way certain blogs and certain news sites love to sensationalize things. Is there any legitimacy to these stories that I'm reading?
If I can start on this one, I would say it's not that there is a question of legitimacy or not, but the U.S. military is coming off a 20-year stint of counterinsurgency operations, right? They have this down, and so it's such a reflexive moment for them. They know how to set up, the outer cordons, the inner cordons, all the kind of physical things that are going on. But they're also very aware of this, of the potential of like insider attacks and things that they would see, not through their own military, but from either the Iraqi armed forces or the Afghan armed forces. And so, as an added layer of caution, they have the time, they have the resources, so why not? And as a way of, again, communicating to the public that we're, checking everything here just to make sure, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I guess
David's right. He's, the counterinsurgency piece is very important in this conversation because the Pentagon is intimately involved in this whole process, and they're working with other government departments, OGDs, to make sure that this is going to be as safe and as smooth as possible. But will there be an incident? I would imagine there will be a small group or a large group, or there will be a group of some form of fashion that you will see that will be there trying to impose themselves on the day, and they will have their flags flying, and they will be exercising their constitutional freedoms to do so. Okay. But it will be cordoned off, and the layers will be there, just as David said. I mean, they are good at this, and they will make sure that it's done right.
Well, yeah, and you're right. I hadn't even thought of that, Dave. The amount of counterinsurgencies that the U.S. has had to go through in the last 20 years is baffling. I mean, even if you want to talk about some of the drone programs in Yemen and some of the other smaller, like forget Iraq and Afghanistan and and then the ISIS thing in Iraq again, but like, yeah, some of the smaller little skirmishes, or I use that term, maybe not smaller skirmish, but
most Western militaries like NATO is slowly moving away from the traditional, we're going to all line up in the battlefield, we're going to have our doctrinal movement through the plains. Now, asymmetric warfare is the new terminology. Everything is about how do we do this better, quicker, more conveniently, how do we use technology to our advantage, and how do we make our strike as precise as possible. So the whole idea of, divisions doing this, yeah, we'll still have those formations, but the asymmetric nature of warfare is now very much the lead.
Yeah.
This part, Kent, particularly the asymmetric aspect of this political contest in the U.S. is a very important one. When we look particularly at the role of the news media, either formally or informally, as one of the biggest sort of contested spaces. And so knowing like this is very much an asymmetric contest. I don't want to call it a battle, but it's an asymmetric contest where the battle over access to the news media is one side of it, and then over meaning and interpretation is the next. And I think to your point that there's probably going to be some sort of like small event or something happening is very likely, because I think the people know in this that it won't take much in order to gain access. And so this is the sort of thing like what happened on the 6th of January. You have a couple of hundred people storming into the Capitol. Right? It's not, this is not, divisions coming over the hill kind of thing, right? It's a couple of hundred people. And so the ability for a small group, 4 or 5 people, to be able to not disrupt the inauguration, but at least create some headlines for themselves, that's very possible and very likely.
Headlines in their own little social media echo chambers, right? That they're going to just all pat each other on the back for.
That's right. Look for people dressed up in all sorts of costumes and things that they know. Again, will be great.
Another Viking guy, just what we need. That Viking horn guy. Too many memes. That's the thing, right? It's if you can make a meme, you can get your statement out there. And man, has Trump Nation or MAGA or whatever you want to call them clued into that over the last few years. And just while I'm going to get ready to wrap up this little sub-segment on social media here. But I do want to talk about specifically Facebook, Twitter, and the reward system that seems to be in place for creating controversy or for creating negativity. Because there was a New York Times article, I'll cite the New York Times, where they had a veteran and a college student, and they once they started posting about more extreme things, they started to see their likes and comments go from within the tens to the hundreds. And is that the echo chamber, or is that the algorithm of Facebook just inherently wanting to be negative because it gets the most reaction? It doesn't know that it's negative, but it gets the most reaction, so it keeps the ball rolling down the hill. What are we looking at here?
System.
Yeah, it's the how the algorithms respond to our own psychology, and people are certainly interacting with things that are negative or conflictual, and the algorithms support that, and so they'll work to reinforce that. So things that are having conflict by nature are creating more engagement, and then because there's more engagement, they're spreading further and faster.
Yeah, and so like pushing to another point that I'm again, feel free to debate, confirm or deny, whatever. But again, with the tactics that they're using for the inauguration, I'm going to lump this into it. But also when it comes to social media, like I think we're going to see more and more policing of social media now. Like I'm glad that the private sector of America, which is Facebook and Twitter and all these private industries that have these apps, all banded together to get rid of Trump or to ban Trump because they realized finally it was affecting their bottom line. So I feel in a lot of ways the capitalistic end of America self-corrected eventually in that regard. I mean, like a little bit, but maybe. But, I feel like, there needs to be more regulation on social media. And I'm not one, you guys both know me, I'm not a regulatory guy. I'm not like I don't like regulations, but I have this, and I don't know how it would play out. And maybe you guys I can bounce this off of you, but we need to have our own social media silos for our nations, and this comes into something we're going to transition to, I think to cap off our discussion here today, is PSYOPs, info-ops coming from other nations. And, we can get into Russia, China, Iran, whatever nation, but, we need to have some kind of a border on our internet access or what we're being exposed to, because we all know, we've heard Russian bots, or, these bots that aren't even real people or are people on the other side of the world that are running these fake accounts. We need protection against that. I mean, listen, if a segment of Canada or a segment of America truly believes, certain things, I want to know. I want to know that it's legit, because I want to see the diversity of opinion that's out there, but I want to trust it as well. I want to trust that it came from a Canadian, even if it is some guy, sitting in his mom's basement and he doesn't have a lot going for him and he's writing angry things. I still want to know that he's a Canadian and that he could be my neighbor or he's a fellow member of my society, right? Is there a way to, without coming off as some dystopian, authoritarian regime, is there a way to make sure that other nations aren't able to do that to us, like they're still doing to us, like they've done to us and America? Is there a way to protect ourselves from that?
Let me start off, David.
Yeah, go ahead,
You're the more educated of the two of us, so I'm gonna let you finish off. But I'll have my little piece. Mm-hmm. We use the phrase "freedom isn't free," and we use it here. They use it in the States. They use it other places. But I think the key for me is that when you understand that speech and language has influence. And when you say things and it's based upon hate, or it's based upon a prejudice, or it's based upon a false piece of information or a lie, then that's where the freedom of speech starts to be infringed upon. And there's no, as you say, there's no referee right now as a check and balance for that. And it's really going to the left and to the hard right in both ways. Mm-hmm. So in my, just my little piece of the world, when you say freedom isn't free, you can't infringe upon other people's freedom either. You can't incite hate. You can't, make things dangerous for other people because of your supposed freedom. And I think this is where we need to educate people again to say, you know what? Yeah, our forefathers fought for freedoms, but you really need to understand what those freedoms are and what your responsibility is within that application of freedom. And I think there's a piece of that missing in this country and a huge piece of that missing down south. Tirade ends.
There we go.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Like Kent is not wrong about the information, and certainly we have laws that help regulate some of that extreme, right? For whether they're hate speech or libel, these types of things to prevent that sort of outright hostility or slandering. But the information system or environment that you described, Kris, was almost like that information nationalism from generations gone by, because we do, within broadcast, of course, we have the CRTC that is regulating what's going on over the airwaves. We have all sorts of laws of what publications can come in and out of the country, split run magazines and all these sort of things that you'll remember. And so there's been a lot of laws around sort of containing information within a country. Sometimes they call it information sovereignty, and protecting you or isolating the population from information outside of the country. Move forward to the digital revolution, the addition of social media, all of that disappears, right? And so we have this tremendous uptake of transnational communication, and no longer are our communities, our information environments organized around the nation state. They start to then transition to these communities of sentiment, whether it's like just people who are speaking English is one way it rounds out, or any other language for that matter. But also these communities of interest politically. And then, we start getting further and further refined into groups that are back into that echo chamber. And so, we have the laws, we have the ability to be able to we can break up the large companies, we can regulate them in different ways. But we also have a lot of leaders that have been supporting them. So if we look at this through the lens of Twitter and Facebook dropping Trump from their platforms, they really did so like at the 11th hour, right? Yeah. There's no question he has made them a huge amount of money over the last 4 years and beyond.
In memes alone.
Yeah, in memes alone, but that's it. But it's all free content, and it's all stuff that moves around. And so 88 million followers is not nothing. And certainly a big decision. And like, as I say, they did the right thing when no other options existed, right? Yeah. And so but like at the same time, they're also sort of letting go of a lame duck president at that point. The power in Washington has already started to shift to the new administration. And so why not set him free at this point? They could have done so, a year ago or
easily. There were so many moments in the past, especially Twitter, that could have, with all the misinformation that he put, even before they started putting notifications like this is false, or this doesn't, even before that, they could have done more, but you're right. He made them a ton of money. a ton of cash. And, you know, and that, again, I said the capitalist society balanced itself out in the end, but you're right, the 11th hour. And the same could be said for sane-minded Republicans or the leader of the House or the Attorney General or anyone. Like, where were you like 5 months ago? You know, but again, I mean, we're moving forward. You're right.
And let's not forget, this guy has the biggest platform for speaking out probably in the world. He goes into that office, into that press box office in the White House. He can go any time of the day and he can speak to the nation. And yet he used Twitter.
Yeah, on the toilet at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, from a traditional standpoint, you're absolutely correct. But now in the sort of modern information environment that we have, I would think arguable that his platform over Twitter is greater than the White House press box.
Yeah, because I mean, he's probably had access to that over the last little while, and I know he's done a few little things. He's got some garden of celebrities that he's come up with as his final thing. I'm sure that's the little garden with all the little, I don't know what they're doing, the celebrity garden or whatever they're calling it, that's what we're going to remember him for sure. Not all the other stuff, the celebrity garden on his way out, for sure. So on the topic of the social media, let's transition to hardcore psyops, info ops. This will be our last subtopic. We'll wrap up on this. But again, you know, you want to talk about conspiracies. You know, QAnon is on the right, you know, but on the left, there's a pretty hard conspiracy that has not been proven. And that would be the Russia conspiracy. Now, for me, from my experience, working in PsyOps and sitting in a portable where my full workday was consumed with creating information to pacify a population, I know what I did in that PsyOp realm. I can only imagine what goes on in some of the more aggressive countries like Russia, like China, with their PsyOps pressing in on Western nations. So I sort of lean to believe the Russiagate, you know, it may not have been proven. It may not have ended up, the Mueller report may not have been the big bombshell that CNN promised us for 7 months on end. But there is some shreds of truth out there that still ring true to me. And maybe, again, maybe it's the echo chamber. Maybe it's the alternative blogs. Maybe it's the whatever. But when I see how America has devolved over the last while, I see what happened in Crimea. And for those who aren't, I know you guys know what Crimea is, Kent and Dave, but for those who don't know what Crimea is, it is a former province of Ukraine that was annexed by Russia. And it started when the Ukrainian, the government had a transition of power. They got a president who was not as friendly to Russia, who was not as on good terms with Vladimir Putin. And the next thing you know, the province of Crimea wants to separate. Now, feel free to correct my history here, guys, if I'm screwing this up. But province of Crimea all of a sudden wants to separate. And it started with a grassroots movement through social media and then protests. And the populace wants to separate and join Russia. And the next thing you know, Russian troops are in there fighting a civil war with Crimea to separate from the Ukraine. And now it has been annexed. I don't think it's been rubber stamped by NATO or rubber stamped by the industrialized. Yeah, it hasn't been. But
like the occupied Golan in Syria and Israel.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, this to me seems like what happens in America is that you've got these Russian bots who have done the same thing, spread misinformation. They had the perfect opportunity with the pandemic to make it even worse on top of it all. They got Trump installed. You know, not necessarily as deep as maybe people want to believe on the left, but the bots certainly helped, and the social media helped, that they poured gasoline on the fire to get Trump elected, and everything ever since has been sowing these seeds of anti-government stuff, and now we're seeing protests, and I'm just like, wow, it seems to me like it's out of Russia's playbook. Am I crazy?
I'll start.
Okay.
So I think, you know, historically, we have to remember that Crimea was traditionally a Russian,
right,
ethnically Russian area. And so you're right. There was the grassroots movement to go back to the glory days of Russia and that connection. It was the Soviet Union that took them away from traditional Russia and created the Ukraine. So we have to remember this dynamic. But were they happy being part of Ukraine? Yeah, like you said, as long as there was that connection with Mother Russia and Putin, and as soon as you change that dynamic, people get unhappy. So there's that piece. Now the whole idea of the information operation and the psyop towards going that direction. I mean, there has to be a well thought out plan. There has to be, the narrative has to be maintained, because if you stray from the narrative of what you want to achieve in that black or gray zone, then you're going to have splintering off of everything, and you're going to lose your focus. So I think the Crimea is a good example of the information operation to do what they did, and it was successful. So now that they have what they want, there are the question is with the Russian piece in the U.S. is like, what's the narrative here? Like what you have to kind of reverse the propaganda. What are we looking at, and what are they trying to achieve? Is it just disinformation to create a whole bunch of chaos? Is that the idea? But in that chaos, what's the end state? Like, what do they want to achieve? In Russia's favor, yeah, Trump was an isolationist. Probably was very much in Putin's view of where he wanted to be. And had he had another 4 years, it probably would have been even more isolated. I think it was getting to that stage. And so we'll have to see what happens with the Biden government. But the scary thing about Trump's Republican Party was how much it was going into an isolationist view. And maybe that was the propaganda. Maybe that was the focus of the information operation, was to make sure that Trump got in, and that the isolationist piece, I want my little piece of America, I want my gun, and I don't want anybody to bother me, and I don't want to pay taxes, so leave me alone. And then you've got all these, you've created a situation where the U.S. won't get involved in anything that Russia does. So yeah. David probably has some better language than I've just used for that.
Well, one thing I'd say is that we have to be a little bit careful not to give too much credit to the disruptors and the psyops out there they are very good at creating a little bit of chaos here or disrupting something over there. But in terms of fermenting sort of wholesale change is very, very difficult. And so when we take like the idea that, if all conspiracies sort of have a grain of truth somewhere in them, and we combine that with the Russian psyops or political warfare model that is more often described as the fire hose of falsehoods. And so they're throwing a lot of mud, right? And a lot of stuff against the wall to see what sticks. And so if we go back 4 years and say the objective was probably just to create some chaos, disrupt Hillary Clinton's campaign, and lo and behold, this this run up the middle happens. Donald Trump is elected president. That's great. Everybody's taking credit for it, right? Is it was this Russia's doing? I don't think so. Yeah. Certainly, they're making a contribution, but it's stuff it's much easier to read into it in hindsight than it is to say, okay, now go change the government over here.
Right. Well, Mother Nature definitely threw Russia a softball with the whole pandemic thing, for sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure their bots knocked that one out of the park. But yeah, you're right, Dave, and both of you guys are obviously right. And again, these are things that I'm asking, and I know a lot of other people are asking themselves, and trying to wheedle through what is, what you want to feel sometimes in your heart. Like, I want to believe the Russia thing, but I want to get it from guys who know better than I do. And you guys certainly do know better than I do in various experiences, whether it's through study or whether it's through all that time in various conflicts. Kent, it's staggering, actually. You guys are both, sorry, Kent is my favorite veteran, but Dave, you could be my second favorite, okay? Are you still in? Dave?
I've just recently retired.
I thought so. Well, you know, just the elder of the tribe there. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. It's a great life until a certain point.
Yeah. Well, I hope you guys can obviously be on tap again anytime here on Big Kris Live. I know Kent and I actually do have another date at a future episode. We're going to have a roundtable on The Curse of Oak Island, the television series. So I don't know if you watched that, Dave, but no, that's okay. Don't worry.
No, as a media scholar, the one thing I don't do is watch television.
Yeah, there you go. Because you learned what it's all about.
Bad for your mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like working at a hot dog plant and finding out what's in the hot dogs. You're like, I don't know about that. Thank you very much. Again, David Harms, Kent Stewart, thank you for being on the podcast. Big Kris Live. We're live on DeanTube today. In the meantime, if you follow the storyline over the last few episodes, we'll be back to streaming live on Facebook in the not-so-distant future. I believe we're at day, I don't know, like 18 of 30 days before we're allowed back on. That's a whole other story. Like I say, I'm trying to class it up with some different guests. Thanks again, guys.
Too much penis talk.
Exactly. That's it. Too many dicks, guys.